Hi Triathlon Queensland members and Triathlon community. Welcome to the Triathlon Queensland Education Series and the Club Culture and Performance Culture Link workshop. We are really excited to be able to provide this workshop from the comfort of your own home. We do encourage your participation, but ask you to leave your questions as comments on the Facebook post, and we'll be able to get back to them shortly. I am very lucky to have the wonderful Chelsea from Sportsite Queensland with us here again today. Fantastic to have you again. I'm really excited to hear your insight and knowledge and maybe get some more tips for our club coaches and even athletes. So I might hand over to you and just ask you to give just a brief background as to your role and what Sportsite Queensland do.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. I'll just put my little microphone on here. Okay, we're good to go. We're all rolling. Thank you for having me again. I presented a workshop about a month ago. We're doing this a little bit differently to last time. So I think last time it was recorded, Skype kind of set up. Today we're doing a Facebook Live. So just being aware of, any comments that you put out there, it's a pretty public space. So just being careful about all that. A bit of background about myself. So I'm a performance psychologist. I work at Sportsite Queensland, and we work really closely with individual athletes, teams, within the sporting space, but also the performing arts space as well. So it's really cool to be being able to deliver a workshop in a different setting on a Facebook Live. So this is my first time doing this. So hopefully we get a lot of engagement from you. I will ask for comments and stuff through the comment page. I just had it on my phone, but I'm getting the sound through, so I'm going to try and turn it off. So if we've got questions and comments, Kathy will help me out on that front. A bit of background about myself, a bit extra. My sporting background was in swimming. So a lot of people often said to me when I stopped swimming, I should get into triathlon. I'm no good on land at all. So I'm always very impressed by what triathletes go through. And the limits that they push themselves to. So it's an amazing sport. So it's really great to be here today presenting to you all. Bit of background. So last time I was here, we presented Knowing Your Athlete, so a guide to the iGen adolescent. So this was obviously based around adolescents, but knowing the triathlon space, you don't all work with adolescents. So it's very much across the lifespan. We had, I think, 4 coaches in the room with us, and then we had the online presence. And across that group that we were working with, there was anywhere from 5-year-olds through to 55-year-olds, which is, it's not all adolescents, obviously. And we spoke a lot about the importance of knowing your athlete, knowing how they function. We spoke about the brain and how that works, which we'll focus on again today. And I think it leads really nicely into this workshop as well. So talking about building squad culture, so the culture performance link, obviously a really broad topic. So with only an hour and a half, we can't cover everything on squad culture. But hopefully you get some practical tips throughout the time as well that you can apply with your own groups. So a bit of an outline today, again, encouraging you if you have questions throughout. We will have some discussion and self-reflection as well. But the main topics we'll look at is the brain and the environment. So the environment that you train in, you perform in. As a coach, you're there a lot of the time, although I know a lot of you aren't there all of the time. I know last session, many of you are working remotely with your group. So I think that's a unique set of challenges as a coach. So trying to build a culture when you are online with a lot of your athletes. So trying to keep in mind how some of these principles might be able to be included in your work today as well. We're going to look at dysfunctions of a team, so a specific model around team culture and how that relates to your group as well. Culture, connection and mindset, and we'll talk a little bit about growth mindset and culture, so how that relates to the brain and function of a team, and then hopefully some practical strategies that you'll be able to take away with you. So I'm not sure how many people we have online live now, but hopefully we've got someone that's willing to comment. Just a bit of a brainstorm for you all. I'm going to put all the questions up here, so feel free to answer to any of them. What comes to mind when you hear the word culture? So obviously culture is a little bit of a buzzword at times, but we all know that culture is something that's important. But why is it important? Also, what are some good examples of sporting team culture? So thinking about, what you see in the media or high-performing teams that, people say have a great culture. Does anyone have any examples that immediately come to mind in regards to that? So I'm going to leave a little minute to see if anyone comments. So often in sport, whenever there's a controversy of some type, often the word culture comes up and it's sort of termed as, the culture's not great, or high-performing teams that often bond well together and perform at a high level, we often talk about them as having great culture. Team dynamic, yes, so absolutely. The dynamic of a team, how they function together, how they communicate, trust. Was someone that commented. Yes, so the All Blacks was a comment that came up. If anyone's read Legacy, it's a really good book about the culture of the All Blacks. It's really insightful, and they clean up the locker room, so all the players would stick around after the matches and they would do that. That was part of their team culture. Philosophy, so a similar philosophy between coach and athlete groups. All these things that are really important. Provide a place where people want to be. So when we think about culture, it's something that people want to be a part of. They're connected to it in some way. I know myself, I swim in an adult squad at the moment, and it's a great culture for what I'm looking for, and it's something that I want to be a part of. And it's the same in high level sport through to masters, to your weekend warriors. That culture and having that place of where you want to be is pretty key. Does anyone have any examples that they can think of? We've got the All Blacks. Safe place, absolutely. And that's what we'll talk a lot about in terms of safety. So if any of you have any thoughts about this throughout, throw them out there. If you're thinking of any specific teams that come to mind, feel free to throw them in the comments. And we'll build from there. So when we talk about culture, obviously we're all aware of it, we know it's a good thing. Definition, a couple of the ones that you find on Google, the expression of a team's values, attitudes and beliefs through behaviour. So a lot of what culture is about, it's behaviour and how you act towards each other, towards other groups. And the ideas, customs and social behaviours of a particular group or society. So what a group stands for, what their values are, again behaviour, what those values and behaviours look like together. So we all want a strong culture in our organisations, teams, communities, squads. We all know it works, but how? So we're going to talk a little bit about that in more depth, but culture is across the spectrum. So last week we spoke a little bit about connection. As human beings, we like to be connected to someone or something or a group. And so that's in the workplace, in your personal lives, family. Families have your own culture because it's something that you're about. We'll get into the depth about what it is. So we'll go straight into the brain and an environment and the connections there. So this slide looks pretty complex, but we'll break it down quite a bit. Like last time, we spoke a lot about the brain, and I think we spoke about the stress response and neuroplasticity and how the brain works at a neural level. And that's what we're kind of looking at here, because I think it's important to know this information because it really drives everything that we talk about in sports psychology and in this space. So if we look at the picture of the brain that we've got, there's 3 main areas of the brain that we're kind of looking at in this example. So you've got your survival brain, which is the green part that's kind of at the bottom there. Your survival brain is sort of the part of the brain that's developed first, and it's all about that instinct. So, you know, it regulates heart rate, breathing. It's like your internal, I guess, reflexes. That's not the word I want, but it's the stuff that just happens naturally. We don't have a lot of control over it. It's our instinct, and it just kind of works that way. In the middle, we've got our emotional brain. So we've got it's part of our limbic system, and it's an amygdala. So I'm not going to get super technical about this stuff, but the amygdala kind of is that fight or flight response. So when we think about any kind of fear, whether that's, you know, a fear of spiders for myself, or the fear of getting up and performing, or the fear of, you know, doing a really tough set or going for a, you know, a difficult run or something like that, that fear response in your brain activates. So the main purpose of our brain is to keep us safe. So that fear response is actually there to keep us safe. So this will kind of make more sense when we add some extra examples to it. And then we've got our smart brain, which is right at the front of our head. And that's where we kind of think about things, you know, rational thinking, decision making, judgment, all of those things that we really need to, you know, be switched on for. So basically, when we have that fear response, our body naturally reacts to it. So a bit like the stress response that we talked about last time, you have some kind of fear and your body tends to go through that physiological response where heart rate is raised, breathing becomes quite short and fast, you know, might be sweaty, all of that kind of body stuff that goes on with that, and the survival brain kind of kicks into action there. So that fear survival connection can be really closely linked, whereas when fear comes in, we want to be able to engage with our smart brain. Okay, so we're in a, you know, threatening situation, we want to be able to connect in with our smart brain. So being able to almost down-regulate that fear response that we have and be able to kind of get back to our smart brain, be thinking clearly, processing, clear decision making, all of the stuff that's really important to sport as well as just general life. So if we're thinking about this model, we're really wanting to create that safe environment, okay? When we think about safety, we all feel safe in certain situations, and by safety we're kind of talking about enriched environments. So environments in which we feel safe, our fear response is down-regulated, we, like I said before, can think clearly, and we move towards thriving. So a lot of the time when we're feeling safe, we have what we call patterns of approach. So we're willing to approach situations, you know, that may make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, but we have that pattern to be able to really thrive in what we're doing, whether that's in sport or life or whatever that may be. The fear response. Sport has often been driven on fear. Fear is, it can create change very quickly, but in terms, you know, of long-term effect, it actually can create patterns of avoidance. So if we think about how the brain is wired, the more often we put in a feared response, we tend to not want to be a part of that anymore. So you tend to withdraw. And that's where that disconnection comes in. So this will, like I said, all make sense when we talk about this in the context of culture. Safety is pretty much the foundation of everything that we do. So when I work with clients, it's about having that safe environment, you know, within their family, that safe environment to be able to thrive in what they do, and it's the same within a team. And as a coach, you play quite a key role to that. So if we're thinking about safety, we'll kind of come back to that in a little bit, but it's part of dysfunction. I'm going to go to the comments again and see how we go. I would love to hear your thoughts. When you think of dysfunction of a team, so we've spoken before about what team culture is, but when we think about team dysfunction, what comes to mind? And then maybe extending on that, how do these dysfunctions affect performance? So as a coach, no doubt you've seen some dysfunction at times because you're human. Whether maybe the team that you're working with now or teams that you can think of in the past, even teams that you see, on TV at a professional sporting level, what are some of the dysfunctions that kind of come to mind? Clash of personalities, absolutely, yes, and that can be between team members, it can be between coach and athlete, staff members. Poor management, yeah, absolutely. When we think about culture, we're generally, great team culture is from the top through to the very bottom. So board level through to, administration, coaching, athlete, everyone kind of is on the same page. No leadership, yeah. So again, that can be athlete or coach, or in organisations, CEOs or the boss if there's no leadership. Any other suggestions of what makes a team a little dysfunctional? Yeah, unity. Yeah. So unity is something that you want. And when you don't have it, that's when a lot of dysfunction comes in. Being a team is about being united. Jealousy, yes, absolutely. So that's where clash of personalities as well can create some jealousy within teams of players, if some players are doing really well, or around selection as well. When it's about ego, yes, sport can have a lot of big personalities, as can business with organisations. Something that comes to mind immediately to me around dysfunction is around that communication. When there's not clear communication, people aren't transparent. I'll wait another minute or so to see if we get anything else that comes out of this. In terms of performance, how do you think these things that we've spoken about, clash of personality, poor management, lack of leadership and unity, jealousy, ego, how does this generally play out in the field of play? How does it affect performance? Yeah, loss of direction or goals, absolutely. So in team and or individual sport, confusion, yeah. So if we're thinking triathlon as well, confusion around maybe race plan, or when you send your athletes out to train by themselves or train as a group without coach, if there's confusion around what's going on, the performance in that training session isn't always up to standard. Conflicting. Yeah. Some really great discussion points. So thank you for your engagement, everyone. I mentioned last time in the workshop that as coaches you're also performing as well. So if you're thinking about your group of people that you're working with, your athletes are wanting to perform, whether it's in the training environment or the race environment, you're also performing as a coach. So this culture side of things heavily influences you and how you work as a coach. So keep those overtraining, absolutely, yes. So if there's confusion, there's no clarity, there's no leadership, overtraining with athletes. So I've got a model up here. Be sure to keep comments and questions flowing on the 5 dysfunctions of a team. So this is by Lencioni. and is one of the common models used when we look at team culture. So pyramid form, as you can see, and at the very bottom there's absence of trust. So if we think about the real key things to creating a culture, if we've got a dysfunctional team or a dysfunctional group, often there's an absence of trust. So like we were saying with the brain before, that's almost the first thing that needs to happen. If we want to create a culture and a space where people can take risk and thrive and perform at their best, there has to be that trust there. We've got conflict, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and inattention to results. So we'll go through each of these a little bit more in depth. Whoop, I've gone the wrong way. So yeah, as I was saying, absence of trust. So we want to have that trust between coach and athlete. Yourself as a coach, you probably know when there's that trust there, you often get the thriving out of the athlete, whether that's in training, so they're often willing to take risks, they're willing to put themselves on the line, you know, work really hard, and same within the performance environment. So race day, if you've got that trust between coach and athlete, often you get the best out of your athlete and yourself as a coach as well. Fear of conflict. As humans, we don't tend to like conflict, we tend to avoid it. So patterns of avoidance, if we're thinking about the brain. People find conflict uncomfortable. You'll often come across people that are like, I just don't like conflict, so I just avoid it. But in terms of a team that is functioning really well, conflict's actually a really good thing. Obviously, it's got to be constructive conflict, but being able to air grievances, talk about, you know, things that are going on in training, maybe outside of training, with your athletes or with your group as a whole, being able to have those conversations actually increases transparency in the communication space. Dysfunctions of a team, lack of commitment. So this is across the board. So when we think team culture, before came up was unity. When a team is thriving, there's obviously unity within that group. So when we talk about lack of commitment, we're talking about lack of commitment from coach or from athletes or some athletes within a group. It may be support staff, anyone that you can think of. Everyone's kind of got to be on board and have that open communication and be able to, you know, call people out on stuff. An avoidance of accountability. So here we're talking about the ability to make people accountable. So if you have that trust and there's not a fear of conflict, you're actually able to call out people that maybe aren't committing to the group how you want them to. So if you've got a group of team values and someone's not living up to those values through their behaviour in some way, if you've got avoidance of accountability, that kind of is let slide. People are allowed to continue on, and in terms of performance as well, that's not always the best thing for the group. And inattention to results. So that's the performance side of things, not focusing on the coaching side of getting the best out of performance. So any questions or comments around this so far? We'll break this down a little bit more. This is obviously looking from the negative side of things. So the dysfunction of a team. So feel free to throw out any questions. So looking at that pyramid that we just had, with an absence of trust, when we flip it, it actually seems quite simple, which team culture might come across as really simple, but getting a group of people, so a lot of you have big training groups that you work with, being able to create this culture is not an easy thing to do. It takes time. Some people say culture takes years to build on. And as simple as it is quite complex at the same time. So the absence of trust, obviously, the opposite of that is to be able to trust one another. So if you're an athlete, to have trust in you as a coach. And that's where I think last session, when we spoke about knowing your athletes, that is really important as well. So knowing your athletes, how they function under pressure, how they communicate, understanding their personalities, is really important within that group. So as a coach, if you've got 20 athletes, knowing all of them is a big task, but building that connection with them, if we're talking about connection in that safe space, we're wanting to trust, and trust takes time to build, and that's why I think culture can take such a long time to shift and change, because it's not just developed overnight. There's no magic wand to just develop trust. Obviously, if you've worked with an athlete for a long time, you might already have that basis of trust that's really important. But if you've got a group, so trusting each other within the group. So if you've got a group of athletes that are going out for a run, you want to be able to trust them that they're going to work together and push themselves how they need to. But also, if you've got an individual athlete that's going out and going for a run, you want to be able to trust that they're doing what they're doing and what you're asking them to do. Fear of conflict. So again, we're kind of revisiting what we were speaking about before, but being able to engage in unfiltered conversations. So really talk out the issues that are there in that safe space. So pretty much any of these sections, if there's a link in the chain, team culture overall can break. Not just lip service, yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking so authentic as well. So yeah, I think with trust, it's about following through with what you say, and that takes time. But you know, if you say you're going to do something as a coach, following through with that behaviour that's congruent with what you're saying, that's how you build trust. And I think the same for an athlete. So if they say something in particular, they want to follow through with that. So it's not just lip service. Tried and true actions over time. Yeah, absolutely. It takes time to build this. And you know, as soon as trust is broken in any kind of relationship, it always takes a little bit of time to rebuild. If that's been broken several times in a short period of time, it's really hard to get back. So I think that's why culture is something that's always needing to be maintained, and it's always evolved. It's not just resting on your laurels. It's something that always needs to be continual growth. So here, when we talk about commitment, so lack of commitment, the opposite of that is commitment to plans. So what we were talking about there. So if you say something, commit to it and actually do it. Values and actions. So thinking about the groups that you work with, you might have a, list of values that your squad lives by, and so then knowing what the behaviours go with those values. So if you've got a value within your team of respect, what does that respect look like in action? So what are the behaviours that go with that? And being able to commit to that, and that's where unity comes in as well, like we were saying before. So I mentioned this before as well, so hold one another accountable. So no one really likes being called out on things. If you're told that you're doing something bad or that doesn't live up to the values, sometimes that can be quite threatening. And if you think about the brain, the walls go up. If you're being threatened in any way, that fear response kicks in, and all of a sudden people get quite defensive. But if you've created an environment where there's that trusting relationship, where you're able to engage in those unfiltered conversations, and you've got a set of values or plans within your group, then being able to hold one another accountable, it's not a personal attack. It's part of how do we maintain this culture. So equal and transparency opportunities of athletes regardless of ability. Absolutely. So I think within a team of any type, everyone's got some kind of strength that they bring to that group, and it's something that I work a lot with when I'm with teams or groups is identifying what are the values that we have as a team, and what does that look like in terms of actions, but also how does everyone fit into that. So regardless of the group, whether age, ability, anything like that, everyone has something unique to bring to the group. They've all got a strength, whether that's being the clear leader that's super vocal and gets everyone up and motivates them, or whether it's the person that leads by example and does things. Everyone has a role to play in team culture. And then inattention to results. So the opposite of that is focusing on achievement and results. And when we think about culture and performance, we think about those teams like the All Blacks. They've got amazing team culture. Maybe they've had a few slip-ups recently, but historically they've always been, you know, an incredibly strong team, an incredibly dominant team over a long, long period of time that's built on great culture. And so when they've had, you know, the trust, the openness and transparency and communication, great values, able to hold one another accountable, the results come. So they have that achievement. They perform on the big stage when it matters, and they trust each other on the field as well. So it's not just trust in the training environment, it's trust out on the field. That kind of filters across all areas. Is there any other comments or questions so far about this model? I think it sums up nicely what we were talking about the brain before, and that trust is really, that safe, enriched environment is so key to everything, performance as well as culture in general. Like I said, seems like a very simple model, but when you break culture down, there's a lot that goes to it, and a lot of people that need to be on board with this process. And often when you go through this process, people, you know, look at the team and the culture that you have, and they see whether they fit into that. Is that similar with their philosophy of how they want to train or coach? Are their values congruent with the group's values? I think, yeah, coach has a real key role in this process. So while you're sitting, yep, question? Oh, hasn't come through. For some reason.
How important are athlete leaders to preventing dysfunctions from embedding?
Athlete leaders? Yeah, absolutely. I think athletes play a big role. I think when I was sort of talking about in a team, everyone kind of has a role to play, and sometimes there are those leaders, and I think a good leader connects with the people in the group. It's not all about them, it's really a team approach, and great leaders have that ability to create and foster that safe environment as well, and, you know, hold people accountable, all of those things that are on the model. I think they have a huge role to play. Often your great leaders will behave in a way that's in line with your group values and what's important. In terms of the embedding, I think, like I was saying before, with this model, I think the basis of everything is that trust and safety, but you can look at each of these sections individually and work on culture, you know, from that one perspective. But as soon as there is a link in the chain and you kind of let your guard down as a group, that's when team culture falls apart. So having those great athlete leaders within a group, it's like, okay, are we fearing conflict here and things aren't being said that need to be said? You know, that can have ramifications on everything else there. So being able to call out these things when you see it, really focus on it. It's always that ever-evolving process of managing team culture. Athletes have a huge role to play as well. So we had the question come through. So keep them coming and feel free to share as well. So we've got a bit of reflection and brainstorm, because I think being able to apply this information to your own programs and your own coaching, or if you're an athlete watching, and you're within a program, thinking about what part of the model is your group doing well, and I'll come back to the slide in a moment, and what areas of the model do you think your group can work on, or what do you think is the most challenging part of the model? So do you maybe have that trust down pat, but we don't actually hold each other accountable for, you know, the training environment? So I'll flip back and forth every now and again, but also thinking about the coaches in the group, or if we've got athletes that are online, thinking about what is your role in influencing team culture. So we spoke about the athletes just previously and what role they have, but as a coach, what do you think your role is in actually fostering that team culture? So there's a few questions on there to wrap your head around. So a bit of reflection, a bit of brainstorm. I'll bring the slide back up. So again, thinking about the areas that your group might be doing really well, or teams that you may know of. Again, thinking about teams, maybe you're a member of a football club or something that you see that you follow passionately. I'm a Hawthorn supporter in the AFL. So thinking about the teams that you follow as well. So how important is it to understand that this is just sport and there are many things important outside of sport? Absolutely. I think the holistic person, so seeing your identity as more than just an athlete is so important. I know a lot of groups are all about knowing the people within the group and knowing about them outside of sport. So building that, again, that connection, that understanding with people, creating that safe environment, allowing your group to be vulnerable with one another and share things that maybe are going on in their other life, whether it's school or work or family. Yeah, that holistic approach I think is so important to culture, but also just well-being in general. A lot of the time, if we're thinking about culture, it's so wrapped up in, that identity within the team. But it's important to be balanced as a person too, I think. So having things outside of that, because sport isn't forever. Hopefully a lot of people can continue on or find other ways to connect with other groups as they transition out of sport. But I think we've seen it pretty publicly. A lot of athletes struggle when they move on from that and they don't have much else. So absolutely having something else outside of triathlon or sport is really important. As a coach, what do you think your role is in influencing team culture? So obviously we were talking before about team culture is, great team culture is generally from board level all the way down to athlete. So everyone has a role to play, but as coaches specifically, what do you think your role is? I'm thinking back to when I took part in sport, and what my coach or my coaches that I worked with were really good at, and I'll share that in a minute, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of coaching. I'm trying to log in on my phone, but the sound is bad. Role model, absolutely, and we'll talk about that in quite a lot of detail, but as a coach, you are a role model, and I think modeling what you want to see in your athletes as well. So modeling your team values, if you're wanting your athletes to be vulnerable, modeling that yourself. So creating that space where people are willing to put themselves out there and commit. Yeah, so in the sport there are many situations when culture breeds performance and presence. Yeah, absolutely. So you've got your own examples of how culture actually becomes the performance. So that top of the pyramid, it's like the last piece almost, in that you've got all the rest of it, it breeds that performance. So, there's always certain teams, whatever sport it is, that obviously have a great culture. People see it, they want to be a part of it. There's something about them, they've got that aura, and then they perform when it counts. They perform really well on the big stage. How do we educate their needs to have downtime? Was that what it was, Kathy? Yeah, educating. I think value of rest and recovery, is that what we're kind of looking at there? So, as coaches, I think that's really important. It's often, I know, particularly in triathlon, I know I said this last time, with swimming I used to have a day off and I used to live for that day off, and I knew a lot of triathletes, you train nearly every day. So that balance between work and rest and recovery is so important, and the risk of overtraining is quite high. So as a coach, modelling and showing why that's important, explaining the value, one of the values may be in a group, the value of recovery. So whether that's through sleep or nutrition, having a session off if need be, knowing those signs. Each athlete's probably got their own plan, so being transparent within the group that this person maybe need more recovery than this person, and that being okay. There's no jealousy around all of that. Is this for coaches and athletes or also for parents? I think parents have a big role to play, particularly with adolescents. I find that if you have parents on board and you give parents information, they tend to like that, which is good because they live with your athlete, I'm assuming, most of the time. So having athletes on board with parents, I think, is really important to get the values and the team focus onto parents, so that when athlete goes home, parents are on board with what they need to do and what's expected, the expectations. Absolutely, modelling athletes, they model for each other. So that's where like I was saying before, everyone has a role to play. So you've got your leaders that are really outspoken sometimes, but you've also got those people that model what is good behaviour, what actions are in line with your values as a team. Yes, don't be afraid to fail, 100%, and we're going to talk about that. I think failure is an amazing thing. I think we should all be striving to fail, because when we fail, we actually learn the most about ourselves. And when we have that safe environment, that safe, enriched environment, people are willing to take risks, but also to learn from those risks and mistakes. And this is where I think having parents on board with everything is really important too. Because, some parents can be quite, they're wanting the best for their kid, but sometimes it's not always coming across the best way. So being able to have that safe environment at home for failure, making mistakes, taking risks, something doesn't go off, it's like, well, actually it's a real positive thing. So how that's framed. Team culture of accepting of failure, absolutely. Loving the engagement. I think there's some really good points that are coming out of this, and I think that's why the comment section is so good to learn from each other, because you all have unique situations and perspectives as, if you're a coach or an athlete or a parent, everyone has a role to play, so being able to learn from each other is really powerful. So I guess that kind of leads really nicely into mindset. So we were just talking about failure, so team culture is that accepting of failure. And I think that leads so nicely into growth mindset. So for those, some of you may be really familiar with growth mindset, some maybe not so much, but in terms of performance, it's one of probably the most researched area. So if any of you are interested, check out Carol Dweck. She's got quite a lot of books and resources on this area. So this is her specialisation. So growth mindset is key in becoming a great learner and reaching potential. So it encourages that self-reflection and awareness. So this is why I'm getting you all to reflect on your own experiences and what you've been aware of, what you've seen. And it's the basis of continuous improvement and growth. So growth as an individual, but also growth as a team. So if we're thinking about team culture, there's that continuous progress towards maintaining culture, improving culture, and by doing that, the top of that pyramid that's where the results come. So it's almost like a bit of a process to be able to get to that peak where it all comes together. So research shows that we learn best when outside of our comfort zone. So we all probably know that, but getting outside of our comfort zone is not the easiest thing. And depending on context, it can vary. So when we're in a safe, enriched environment, we're more confident to go out of our comfort zone. So again, if we're linking back to the brain like we were talking about before, as soon as there's that fear, that's when the walls go up. But if you're in an enriched environment that, allows for fear, allows for failure, allows for you to make a mistake, you're actually more confident to be able to get out of your comfort zone. And you're creating that connection in your brain to be able to go, this is a safe place where I can thrive. So a growth mindset allows us to take risks, make mistakes, and embrace challenges. So this is where we get thriving, which is what we're talking about in terms of performance, but culture. So again, it's all coming back to this connection, whether it's connection in the brain or connection as a group. So hopefully you guys are able to read this. So this is from the Train Ugly website, which if you're interested in growth mindset has a lot of awesome resources around it. Some posters similar to this. So as I'm going through this slide, think about how you can develop a growth mindset as a coach and how you can implement this with your group. So whether, thinking back to the pyramid as well, how does this growth mindset fit into those different areas? And I think growth mindset is the very basis of that trust that we're talking about. So basically the idea is that there's two kind of mindsets around performance. You've got a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So fixed in terms of beliefs. Fixed mindset is more around that your skills are you're born with it or you're not, and you can't learn and grow. Okay, so it sounds very harsh, there's no development, but if we're thinking about us as people, learning in any aspect of our life, but us as a group and creating that culture, you can always learn, you can always grow in any area, any context. The focus, a fixed mindset person tends to look at performance and outcomes and is more concerned about not looking bad. So again, there's that fear there. So if you're really concerned about performance and outcomes, whether it's time or selection or anything like that, there's often the fear of looking bad as well. Whereas growth mindset is more about the process, so continuously getting better. So if you relate that back to fear versus like safe environments versus compromised environments, your growth mindset is much more in line with that safe, thriving environment. So the keys to growth, so again, feel free to throw any comments out in the discussion about ideas that you might have around growth mindset, how you can implement it with your group or things that you've done in the past, so sharing and collaborating in that knowledge. So keys to growth, fixed mindset, it's not necessary, it's not useful, so effort, it'll just happen, whereas growth effort is always useful. It will lead to growth in some way, whether that's growth as an athlete, as a person, in terms of performance. Challenges is a really big one, because as humans we're going to face challenges, whether that's in sport, personal life, in your group, anything. I think fixed mindset is more you back down and avoid, so you frame that as a threat. So any kind of challenge that's out there, so if you think about your athletes and the challenges they have, you know, a challenge may be getting up and performing at a national event or performing at your first triathlon or whatever it may be. If that's framed as a threat, then they're obviously not going to perform at their best. They're kind of avoiding. That's where you see people, you know, hold back. Whereas a growth mindset perspective is all about embracing that fear. So embracing and persevering through the fear, through the challenge, and framing everything as an opportunity. So when we look at things from that perspective, we often get the best out of ourselves. So again, thriving. I'm using these words a lot, but it's kind of really emphasizing the point. So when we think about mistakes, so we were talking before about failure and making mistakes. It's actually an amazing thing. People with a fixed mindset often try to avoid. So we're talking about the brain before and patterns of avoidance. If you're in a culture where, again, you embrace challenges, you are not afraid of failing, you tend to treat them as learning opportunities. So what did I take from that? How can I use this to learn to become better? And same thing with team culture. So when you're creating team culture, there's always going to be mistakes that come in, whether that's from, you know, a board member or coach or a group of athletes, whatever it may be. Having that safe environment is being able to call someone out on it, but also treat that as a learning opportunity. So where did we go wrong here? How did our behaviour conflict with what our values are? Treating it as a really good conversation point and a way to move forward, using it as an example. Feedback, again, another massive point. Athletes are getting feedback all the time. Those with more of a fixed mindset see feedback as not helpful, and they're the kind of people that get defensive and always take it personally. So if we're linking this to team culture, if you've got a lot of people in your group that are quite fixed mindset orientated, that trust to be able to see feedback as a good thing, that's going to take a while to develop, and that's okay. But as a coach and as other group athletes in the group, you're always modelling this growth mindset approach of it's useful information, you appreciate it and you use it to grow. So that's a bit of a breakdown on fixed and growth mindset. So the questions that we had on the side there, does anyone have any questions or comments around fixed and growth mindset? Have you had any experience with it? Has anyone been aware of it? And any ideas of how you can implement this with your group? I think with growth mindset also encouraging your athletes to self-reflect, for them to think for themselves as well. So asking them, you know, how is their performance? What did they do well? What could they do better? And how could they do it better? So always using that good, better, how approach. So identifying the good thing first, because some athletes are great at thinking of all the bad things, quite fixed, and then better. So what can you do to improve that constant growth? Also just reflecting on yourself, no need to share with this, but thinking about situations where maybe as a coach you've been more fixed in your mindset rather than growth. Or when you've seen athletes that are quite fixed, how they respond to that threat. So if we're thinking about trust, yeah, look for PD learning opportunities, absolutely, because I think you can always broaden your knowledge in areas, whether it's around psychology like we're doing today, or nutrition, or, you know, anything. Coaching workshops, I know there's been quite a few of those with Triathlon Queensland. network, learn from others and hear their ideas. Absolutely. We're talking about connection. I think as Triathlon Queensland, you have that ability to create a culture within your own organisation and your own group of coaches where you collaborate and share and connect, and creating that growth mindset approach within your own team. Can you change a fixed person's interest? By interest, what are we? Mindset? Yeah. So can you change a fixed person's mindset? A growth mindset would say you can. Obviously, people that are very fixed, their brain is wired in a really defensive way, or it's not quite what I'm trying to say, but they're very wired to think and react in a certain way. So if we think about last time, for any of you that were tuned into the session, we spoke about neuroplasticity, and the brain has ability to change. So change how we react to certain situations. I might get Kathy to send out the link to that neuroplasticity video again, but there is the ability, but I think it's about having that trust there. And sometimes you've really got to explain why it's important. It takes time. And again, that's where personality and stuff come in. Sometimes people are more fixed just by the way of who they are than they are growth, but I think there's always movement towards growth. You'll see people that are more fixed in some situations and more growth in others. So if we're thinking about maybe mistakes, I know there's a lot of athletes that are quite perfectionistic in sport, but maybe not other areas of their life. So pointing that out. So maybe in their personal life, with school or work, maybe they're more growth mindset orientated, but in sport, because they're so passionate about it, they become more fixed and they don't, they want to do really well. It's definitely something that can be changed, but it takes time. And I think creating a culture that fosters this growth mindset stuff is a nice starting point. Yeah, challenge yourself, get out of your comfort zone. Absolutely. So find things that you feel safe doing. So I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but nothing's really coming to me. But again, that safety. If you've got a great culture and you feel safe, you're more willing to get yourself out of your comfort zone. And thinking about how you can challenge yourself in other areas. We were talking about, the creation of the whole person before. Someone commented on that. It's not just all about sport. So, okay, if you're wanting to challenge yourself and have that growth mindset way about you, so thinking about how you can challenge yourself in other areas of your life. So is it doing something new for the first time? Absolutely. Stress and anxiety make it super hard to move from fixed to growth, 100%. And that's where we talk about that brain. When we have that fear response and our survival brain kicks in, that connection becomes really strong. So if we're getting super stressed and anxious and we're in an environment that isn't safe, that connection becomes so strong in our brain, it almost becomes automatic. So creating that other connection can sometimes be difficult. It takes time, and I think reflection is really key. So at the very start of today, talking about self-reflection and awareness, and this is why I'm encouraging you to reflect on your own processes while you're watching this. And it's something that I deal with a lot in private practice, so working with athletes or just everyday people around managing that stress response in the brain, and then willing to put yourself out of your comfort zone, face that fear, but having some skills and tools to be able to do that. And that's where, again, if you've got a great environment around you, you're more willing to do that. So keep some comments and questions flowing. Some specifics around, I guess, what you can do. So thinking about the practical side of this stuff. Again, you could talk about culture for hours. We often run series of workshops just on culture, although quite simple on that pyramid that we looked at, quite complex at the same time. So first thing, following on from what we just spoke about, fostering an environment that creates and promotes a growth mindset. So starting with you. So what, if you're sitting here watching this, you all have a role to play in this, this growth mindset. How are you going to implement some of this stuff into your role, whatever that may be? So I was saying before about the environment that I trained with when I was swimming. I think what my coaches did really well was the trust. So we had real clear trust between the group. We knew each other really well outside of the pool as well. So we had that connection there, but also connection as a team. We went through processes as a team to have those difficult conversations, which are actually really important to fostering a team culture. And that we had our own set of values and what that looked like as well. So I'm thinking back to trust, and I think that links into growth mindset. Praise effort and process over talent and outcome. So again, that growth mindset perspective of things. So if people are putting in effort and they're going through a process that's consistent with your team values or consistent with the plan of what you're doing, outcome's not always the most important thing. I know as sport, we're very outcome focused, which is great, but I think process and learning and growth, if that kind of is done well, the outcome will take care of itself. There was another point I was going to make on that, but I've just lost it. So as coaches, I think we all are aware of process. If we focus on the outcome, that's when pressure comes in. You're actually shifting your attention away from what you need to do to get that outcome. And sometimes you may see an athlete run but perform a fantastic time, but in terms of effort and process and plan, they actually haven't executed that very well. Whereas you can have the poorest outcome in terms of time or place or whatever, but you've actually got an athlete that's followed the plan, put in the effort where they needed to, and really focus on that process. So being able to note that, and I think what I was talking about before with good, better, how is always noticing what the good is, regardless of the outcome. Someone can have the poorest race, but there's always something good that comes from that. Use of language is a really interesting one. I think this is really key to those of you who have athletes that are kind of remote, so you're not always with your athletes, you do a lot of online programming and stuff like that. The use of language of how you connect with your group of athletes. So using terms like we, us, team. So this is kind of based around that social identity theory. We like to be connected to something, and that culture comes into that, but just generally we are social beings, and when we are a part of something, we feel good. We are connected in some way, and so just changing the use of language from I to we, us, team. If any of you watched the Australian Open, you may have watched some of Ash Barty play. So she had an awesome tournament, and obviously tennis can be seen as a real individual sport. There's some good examples of that. But the really cool thing about Ash is whenever she spoke about her performance, so it was always we, us, team. So our team, really put together a good performance. So if you get a chance, go back and look at some of her on-court interviews or her press conferences, it's always we. So she's obviously got that trust and connection with her coach and her trainers. So just bearing in mind how you're using that language in your own space. Have vulnerable conversations with your players. So one way to build trust is by being vulnerable. So again, if we're looking back to that pyramid, being able to be vulnerable and own mistakes and own failures, that's being vulnerable. So if anyone likes Brené Brown, she's a researcher and does a lot of research on vulnerability. Definitely worth having a read of because it really links into this team stuff. So I'm not saying as a coach you need to share all your deepest, darkest secrets to be vulnerable, but be able to model to your athletes that you're also a human and that you also make mistakes, and sharing that with them actually creates that safe environment for them to go, oh, okay, my coach is a human too and does make mistakes, so I can as well. Develop a shared purpose. So this is again thinking about the group that you work with, whether that's young developing athletes or your senior elite or your weekend warriors. What is the purpose of your group? And obviously a lot of groups have wide varying ages and abilities and experience levels, but what is your shared purpose? So when you come to training, there's always a purpose. So what is that? What does that look like? How does that connect with your group? Identify team values and or a trademark. So what you stand for as a coach and what your players stand for, what you stand for as a team. So getting player input as well. So this should be something that everyone's involved in. So whenever we kind of do team values work, we like to have coaches and staff a part of that process because they are part of the culture. So identifying what are the most important things to us as a group and sharing that and having those open, honest discussions about that. But then also saying like I was explaining before, what are the behaviours that go with that? So if one of our key values as a group and developing this culture is respect, what does that look like? So what goes with respect? Is it showing up on time? Is it speaking nicely to each other? Is it, whatever it may be. Same thing around things like, I don't know, punctuality. That might be a value, maybe not so much in sport, but maybe in professional. It can be anything. So just really having those conversations about what's important. Model behaviours you would like to see your players engaging in. So if respect is a value of the group, how are you being respectful towards your athletes? Hopefully you all are anyway, but just using that as an example. So you're modelling, okay, I'm showing up on time, speaking nicely to each other, but, having that growth mindset approach. Trying to think of another one. If it's commitment, okay, so commitment. If your athletes are committing, then you want to be modelling that to your athletes as well. Great, so Wildcats basketball, yeah. So all team members were not allowed to swear, so this included all staff. Yeah, so there's creating that standard. And obviously, I'm sure being human beings, there was mistakes at times and you have those honest conversations and you call that out. And frame that as a learning moment, as a teaching point, rather than you're going to just get berated for doing that. On and off court, absolutely. And it's, again, developing that person away from sport as well. So on and off court, off court maybe, in the change rooms, at training, whatever, but also outside of basketball. Is there any other behaviours that you can think of? So that's a great example. Or values that you have within your own team. So if you're an athlete watching this, what are some values within your group? Or you might think of other contexts. So in your workplace, what are the values? Often organisations will have a list of values that is important to them. Schools have that as well. So we see them a lot. And I think the thing with culture is always checking in with these things. So it's, again, always an ever-evolving process. If you have a list of values, often they're just put on the wall and people tend to forget about them. But if we're thinking about that accountability and having that transparency in conversation, being able to really connect with the values, check in once a week. How are we going this week? Are we in line with our values? Is our behaviour congruent with what we're expecting of our culture and our group? Ask your players what they need in order to perform at their best. So again, it's that collaborative approach and getting their input. So often coach has a lot of authority over athlete in some circumstances, but I think we were talking about self-determination theory last time as well, getting them involved in the process, people having some level of autonomy within the group and having a level of say, helps foster a really positive environment. Turn up on time, absolutely. So if that's a value of a team, as a coach you want to be showing up on time yourself. Obviously there's situations where there's going to be stuff that comes up, but committing to that. Any other values that you guys have in your teams? I'm thinking back to, again, when I was swimming, there was an expectation that we would always do the dry land part of swimming. Often when you're waking up at 4:30 in the morning, you just want to kind of lay on the ground, have a bit of a nap and then just jump straight in the pool. But one of our values was to always engage in that prehab activation part of things, and that was an expectation of the group. So if someone wasn't doing it, there was that safe environment to be able to call that person out on that action. I'll hold here for a little while just to see if anyone has anything else to share. Again, this is really powerful to be able to think about, the suggestions that are coming up. How can you apply this to your group? Yeah, thanking the staff after training sessions. So it's part of that respect, isn't it? So actually being grateful for the opportunities that you have within training, be thankful for the coach that's putting in the time, thankful to the athletes for putting in the effort. Building those relationships is so important. So we've gone through some things. We'll obviously have some time for questions as well because we're at 7:15 now. So again, if we're using a growth mindset approach here, just reflecting on what did I learn today. So was there anything particular that kind of stood out to you in the topics that we've spoken about, and how this information can help me in my role as a coach? Obviously, we may have other people watching other than coaches. So thinking about, was there any particular point that you can kind of use and specific strategies that I can put into practice within my program? So on this slide here, I've tried to give some just basic things that you can think of. Obviously, if you're wanting more information and wanting a bit more in-depth, specific to your program tips, you're more than welcome to get in contact with me. But these are just slight things. Like I said, culture takes a lot of time to develop, and getting you to reflect on the pyramid that we spoke about before. What are the areas that you're doing really well at, and where are some areas where maybe you can improve on? And if you've got that basis of trust at the bottom, some of these things are a bit easier to put into place. Honesty and trust, punctuality, desire, discipline, absolutely. They're all really good values and behaviours that often come up in team culture. So again, it's just that consistency across what you say and what you do. That creates that safe space. I'm flicking back between the slides, just coming back to this model because I think it's a really nice way to look at your own program and what you do. feel free to throw out any questions because we've got a few minutes. So thinking about specifically what you can do in the next week, what are some slight changes that you can start to implement to get the ball rolling on this culture stuff? Is it just purely a change in the use of language? So particularly for you coaches who have athletes that are rural or you're more of an online based coach, how can you change the language around, I don't know, your email communication with them, or do you have some values? Do you create some values of the group somehow? Finding ways to build that connection between you and the athlete, but if you've got the online platform, how can you bring the athletes together? I think kind of like what we're doing here, I think Triathlon Queensland are doing a great job in offering these opportunities to everyone and that ability to connect virtually. Effort and process is the focus. It's a great motivator, absolutely, because I think you're always looking at the growth. I know we're using that word a lot, but the growth within training, effort and process, there's always something to be gained. I think I remember in the pool, so you guys are all in the pool as well, a lot of focus was always on times, but there's so much else that can be focused on. It can be, you know, your technique, your skills. It'll be the same on the bike and in the run, regardless of how your times are in training as well. There's always that process and growth in other areas. Change of focus. Yeah, so whatever that focus may be, shifting it to more growth mindset and to the model. Yeah, absolutely. Culture does take time. So, you know, sometimes it's, I think Olympic cycle with sport, sometimes they see it as a 4-year process to change culture. So if you throw 20 things at a group around culture, it does get confusing, it's overwhelming. All of a sudden the space might become quite threatening. So we do sometimes tend to want to jump straight into making change, but I think process, it's all process. So it's all like a slow learning process. Once you get something down pat, you introduce something else. Confusion is not what we want. That's when that threat response kicks in the brain and it makes things a little complex. So even coming up with a plan of your own, so if you're wanting to do some things on culture, what are some of the key points that you want to bring in and how can you make that practical and then slowly build on that? So what's the starting point? And you know, if you're wanting to create a plan and slowly create change, the model's a great way to do that. So how can I build more trust within the group? Is it we start to learn about each other outside of the training environment? Is it we have a group session where, you know, we share things that we enjoy other than triathlon? So just bringing in these different approaches to what you do. Yeah, so training means nothing if the effort and the process isn't there, absolutely. Particularly with sports that are quite high intensity, quite frequent, you know, there's long sessions. If you're kind of just going through the motions and there's not much thought and effort, there's always that process, always learning in some way. Any other comments or even feedback on how you found the session? I'm using a growth mindset approach here. Is there any feedback that you have that on things that you enjoyed or maybe things that you'd like to see more of? Like I said, you're all more than welcome to email me if you're wanting any links to any of the resources or the information that we spoke about tonight. Or if you're just interested in team culture or you have feedback or specific questions around your group on this area, please feel free to contact me. I think I've got 2 email addresses on there, so if you send one to one and I don't get back to you, send it to the other one as well. I'm normally pretty good on the email, so if I haven't got back to you, there may be something wrong with the system. More real life examples, absolutely. That's where I really like to have your input from things. But yeah, that's great feedback, thank you. Normally in a workshop where I have people, we get a lot of butcher's paper out and we have people brainstorming around those real life examples as well. So, you know, what are the teams that you see that have great culture? We had the All Blacks as an example earlier on. So yeah, navigating the virtual world. I've been super impressed with the level of engagement though, so it's been really good. Kathy's been helping me out on the questions, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, and for everyone participating online as well. Really appreciate your time and engagement. It's been fantastic, thank you. Yeah, we really appreciate having you down here, and I know for one I've learnt lots. As like you keep saying, the pyramid looks so easy, but it's so complex. So I think the point of making bite-sized pieces at a time is really important, and hopefully something that everyone can implement sooner rather than later as well too. So thank you so much for coming down.
Thank you for having me and the opportunity to work in this platform.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks again to everyone online. Our next one will be an athlete wellbeing panel later in April, so hopefully we will see you then. Thank you.